Hello, welcome to Dream Labs, copyright table LLC 2022. This is Intro to Dream War Class 1, the Scope of Creation. As I've said, this class I'm operating in a hive mind nest. I'm examining its protocols, I'm installing malware into it. I'm trying to see how it thinks and functions, and I'm relaying this to outside forces. So obviously every now and then while I'm talking you'll hear the revving of engines as the hive mind drives around me all angry like. It means that I'll often be under extreme distress while I'm riding because I'm being chemically dosed to sexually torture me. I'm being electroded because we have to keep up the premise to the hive mind that I am, some sort of kid hostage, which I am, and so it means that I'll be logic bombed while I'm talking, so you'll see me pause at times. I'll be under distress at times. I may look disheveled, but anyways, so I've decided I want to do this class kind of off the cuff. I don't want to have a script that I read. I'll make small amounts of notes, which will help guide the conversation. These classes will be variation of duration and length. For this first class, I thought the best thing I could talk about was the scope of creation. So this first one is called Intro to Dream War Class 1, the Scope of Creation. Good nomenclature, I think. So the first thing I want to talk about is the size of this known universe, the one we exist within. We know it exists because we can experience it and we can see it. How big is this universe? With the Hubble telescope, we've essentially gathered that there's about 2 trillion galaxies like the Milky Way. The Milky Way is the galaxy that Earth exists in. We're on the end of the spiral. As the James Webb telescope comes online, we'll start to discover a lot more. If I had to guess, it's a lot more. To be scientific about how much bigger it is. But so what does 2 trillion galaxies mean? If you were to put that in some sort of understandable terms, theoretically, there has been since the dawn of civilization 10,000 years ago or whatever, or whenever it started. They estimate that there's been 60 to 100 billion people alive total. There's 2 trillion galaxies. The Milky Way has roughly 400 billion planets and 1 trillion stars. So what this means is that there's 2 trillion galaxies with roughly 400 billion planets. So if you were to allow every single person who has ever existed throughout human history their own empire, their own planetary empire, multiple planets, intergalactic empire, you would have each person with their own trillion planets easily, like 2 trillion planets easily, 4 trillion planets still easily a piece. And so that's an astronomical amount. What it means is that humanity, even if we armed every single person in our civilization's history with the latest technology and whatnot, they would still be not relatively small. They'd be I can't say the word. They would be unable to compete with the rest of the empires. So when we start to grasp just how big this universe is, and just this universe, you realize that the idea that America or even the whole planet working as one is somehow going to wage a war that's interstellar against other civilizations that have multiple planets. Earth fighting a civilization that has 40 planets would be extremely hard, even if we had equal technology. But the civilizations that exist now or are coming into existence or will exist, we can't compete with them. We just literally can't compete we would have to create a Van Neumann machine, which is a machine that flies to a star, creates a Dyson sphere around it, builds a manufacturing base, and begins picking at the asteroids using the star's energy to manufacture a copy of itself, which then flies to another star, like pluraling as if it's a tree branch. So it goes to the first star, the first node, and then it creates a manufacturing machine, self-replicates, and goes to 2 more stars, and then 4 stars, and then 8 stars, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, and like, even at a rate of fast and light travel and extremely fast construction, it would still take Earth thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of years to even make a dent. And like, what this means for us is that our civilization cannot defeat anything that we face. And like, when we understand this, we realize just how screwed our civilization is if we piss somebody off. And it means that, like, they have, I can't think of the name, Klaskov scale or something. It's a scale that ranks how large a civilization is in our universe based upon the amount of energy it gathers. A type 0 civilization is one that uses all of the energy from the Earth. The type 1 is this, and it has built a Dyson sphere, which is a Dyson sphere is a machine that wraps around a star and collects its energy. It can also go around white cores, and a white core, so you have a black hole, and if you were to get to the point where you were 1 Planck atomic weight above the collapse into singularity, you would start to have a white core. And as you pulled further and further away from the atomic weight needed to collapse something into a singularity and form a black hole, you would have various white cores until they became like, I think it's called like super red giants or whatever, red giants, you know. And it would, and so like like a white core, you can still harvest energy from it, and like there's an astronomical amount of energy in a star. So that's type 1 civilization. A type 2 civilization, if I am thinking of it right, has Dyson sphered pretty much, you know, I'm going to look it up real quick because I think I'm getting I think I'm getting the okay, so type 1 is a civilization that has used all the energy on the planet. A type 2 uses all the energy in its planetary system, and a type 3 uses all the energy in a galaxy. Dyson sphering the stars with Van Neumann machines, collecting the energy for whatever reason, building star fuel, fueling matrix reality hypercomputation computers that are the size of planets like DeepThink, and it's called the Kardashev, Kardashev. Pronunciation is not my strong suit. So, and then it gets higher than that. You have civilizations that create energy eventually, like a type 7. But, so, the civilization types that you get when you start getting to the size of like entire galaxies being Dyson sphered, and like what this means is that they have the resources of a trillion stars. If they have 1 galaxy, and there's 2 trillion galaxies, and so like it's infeasible for humanity to win any war that is started against us by even the smallest heavenly community at our current stage. What does this mean? It means a lot like how theoretical physicists started figuring out how to fight, how everything would work, before they had the technology to really see atomic structures, or they had the technology to look down at subatomic levels. It means we're in the era of just pure theory and conjecture. So that's what the purpose of this class, I guess, is to begin the theoretical concepts, begin conversing with each other regarding how will we fight on the interplanetary scale, the intergalactic scale, and how do we do this without getting snuffed before we even get off the planet. And a theory I have, this is kind of off topic, but later in the class I'll come back to it and why it's important. If you understand that energy can be created, the inflation rate of the universe creates a vacuum between two plates, which sparks energy, or the Ark of the Covenant, which theoretically allows you to essentially get energy from the expansion inflation rate of the universe. And energy is no problem, and you have energy can become atomic structures through CERN type particle smashers. What is the one resource that will never be, you'll never have enough of? And it's information. Information is infinite. If you understand the theoretical model of the concept of God's mind, you take an R spectrum with it, which is an infinite line, and then you add another dimension to it, another R, and you have R squared, then you have R cubed, and you have an infinite cube, and then you start to look into the cube, and between 0 and 1 there's an infinite amount of 0.0 to the infinite length of 1, 0.0 to the infinite length of 2, and so there's infinities within every single square. There's an infinite square within the square, and so it's an infinity of infinite subsquares within the infinite cube, and that's what our spatial reality is. And so if you were to they have the theory of a monkey typing on a typewriter over an infinite amount of time, and eventually he'll create every work of Shakespeare without any spelling error in it. And it's the same with our spatial reality. And so people don't comprehend how can intelligent design come from a creation without a creator. And I'm not saying God exists or doesn't exist. It's because the multiverse is either nearing infinite or is infinite. And so when you take the mind of God, which was that mathematical spatial infinite cube with infinity within it, and you start turning points or dots on inside of it, which is like subatomic particles or atomic structures, and you start turning them on and off randomly over a long enough time period across enough universes, and it doesn't even have to be infinite, you end up with intelligently designed, or things that appear to be intelligently designed. And so if you want to understand this concept, instead of imagining a monkey typing on a typewriter, you simply have to think of a monkey arranging sticks in a field. Eventually, he'll create the model for every single transistor chip in creation, and then if he starts and then you create through randomized patterns every single thing that can ever be engineered or exist in creation, and then you start feeding it randomized data, and these computer chips that are modeled sticks in a field will eventually, if you feed them randomized data, create every software program that can or ever will exist, which theoretically is why viruses naturally erupt off of hypercomputation computers that are running randomized data patterns. If you create a quantum computer that's strong enough and you tell it to search through randomized data, you'll create viruses, you'll create malware, you'll create all sorts of things just from the sheer force of computation you have. And so to digress, the multiverse. So we know the universe is 2 trillion galaxies large. We know that Earth is nothing compared to the reality of what could be out there and is probably out there. That's just in this universe. Theoretical physics is now starting to believe that there's other universes that are attached to our universe. And so there's 2 types. There's the initial Big Bang singularity somehow occurred. We still don't know how. It may have been a paradox of a tachyon charged with an insane amount of energy going backwards through time that caused the Big Bang, that then created the reality. that then may have resulted in an intelligent hyper-intelligence collective creating a tachyon gun and shooting it backwards to create the Big Bang, so it'd be intelligently designed from inside of creation in a paradox or some other mechanism. No one really knows yet. But when you start to get the multiverse, you have two different types. You have an infinite multiverse, which is just is itself, before intelligent design, not infinite. And the reason it's not infinite is because there's the Planck unit, which is like the smallest unit you can get to before you reach singularity. And so there's a Planck unit of time, Planck unit of length. Probabilistic frameworks have Planck units, which is why the law of regression occurs. But if you have a multiverse that is a square, and like every universe that exists is a slide, and it has every possible variable combination within this cube, and this cube is just infinitely repeating, overlaying itself. The reason it's finite still is because the number of variables is finite and the amount of time is finite. So it's astronomical. It's 2 trillion galaxies with particles particles tesseracting because space-time on the Planck unit level is tesseracting, or swerving or tunneling because of the tesseracting of space-time, and the compression of the cubes and whatnot, which gives the illusion of it jumping and swerving as space-time moves around it with like a frame dragging effect. You still have a finite multiverse, even when it's infinite, and it's astronomically, unfathomable how many variables are at play. It's still a finite amount of time and a finite amount of variable combinations, and so it's a cube, and it's repeating itself infinitely. Now, if you start to slide from one dimension to another dimension, or inter-multiverse dimensional sliding, you start to mate them, and like, since it's a finite cube to begin with, because of the limited variables and limited amount of time, eventually a civilization will come along and they'll slide from their universe into another cube, and without affecting the variables, they'll map the entire multiverse. It'll take eons, but with the drone Van Neumann machine combined with molecular level scanning, hypercomputation that's being powered by entire universe slides, they will be able to map, and with a byte or a bit string, which is a single string of ones and zeros, they can name every single galaxy, every single universe slide that exists in the first multiverse modeled cube. And so what do they do with this technology then? Well, they can then start to map the mating of the multiverses. And so when you have a multiverse slide and you jump into another one, you've essentially mated 2 slides and created a new slide. And like, what this means though is that over time, the genetic mating of the universes with the diploid model, genetic algorithm model, you can begin to, over eons, map the various mating branches, and you can begin to monitor them for like fitness function and stuff like that. And it's on the universal multiversal level, but it follows the same mathematical models as bunnies mating, essentially. And where does that lead to when a civilization has mapped the initial cube and begun mapping the mating, and like they do this for eons? It leads to hyper advanced civilizations that are on like a god level, using multiverse cubes as labs, and they use it like an entire multiverse cube as a lab, and like it's astronomical, but they could have millions of these multiverse labs running simultaneously, having an entire multiverse cube run the computer systems that are doing all the data mapping. And so like even then, when on that level, to regress and come back to digress what I was talking about, the information is still infinite because the mind of God is infinite. And like what does this mean for our planet? To really come back to what I was trying to say, the likelihood of our planet simply being an information farm that creates novel data through randomized parsing through our neural networks, which adds spontaneity, intelligent editing, and novel creation of culture, art and science, ideas, delusions, narrations, anthropomorphic realities. In the Matrix movies, they say the machines have us in cages without us knowing it for our body energy, which is stupid. If anyone really contemplates like how little energy would come from a human body compared to how much energy is required to power a machine, they would see it's not feasible. But the reality is that if a civilization wanted to farm information, they would use what we have as our civilizations right now. So there's a high likelihood that the reason the Fermi Paradox exists, which is that we don't see intelligent life and there's no one visiting us and stuff, is because we're an information farm. And it's feasible, it's realistic, and it's the likelihood of if our galaxy and that exists in this universe is part of a cubed multiverse that is nearing infinite but still finite, and just repeating itself endlessly. Well, these other older versions, which go back infinitely and go forward infinitely, these other civilizations have mapped and they've data mined. They're watching the mating. They're using entire multiverse cubes as research labs or information farms or energy collection units. The reality is that's highly probable. That narration that I've just described is one of the most probable narrations there is. And what do we do with this information? I don't know a lot we could do, to be honest, how to fight this. But so Earth is most likely an information farm for a hyper-advanced civilization, advanced so far that we can't even imagine it, who's data mining our internal minds, our civilizations as part of a nearing infinite multiverse that's repeating itself cubed infinitely. But this story has been told, it's just symbolic. So they believe, certain subsects of society believe that alien life put us on this planet to mine for gold. If you replace the term gold with information, and you understand that farming information from beings who are just randomly parsing data to create novel cultures and whatnot, and you understand that this civilization is spread across the multiverse cubing, mapping everything with computer systems that we can't imagine, it starts to seem probable even. And so I want to get right now into an understanding that the anthropomorphic principle, which is the human's ability to write stories with secondary processing or linguistic modeling to explain things, it explains who we are to ourselves, who others are to us, and how we relate to them. Creates these vast fictions of who we are as people, what we believe in, what we think about anything, and it allows us to create tools, adapt, survive, because it's an intersubjective model that allows us to converse and transmit data. Some people say language was a linguistic virus that allowed remote controlling of others or transfer of communication. But if you really start to get into these things, the various concepts that are plausible and probable, they're infinite because of how reason and logic work. There's the unknown, which is always possible and even probable for any argument, and the arguments are infinite, both for and against. You have an infinite weighting, so anything you believe has an unknown probability that's infinite against it and for it. So whatever you choose to believe in is faith-based. So the end of nihilism, which is proved with the model, logic proof of the unknown, which can never be disproved or discounted. It's always plausible, so it has to be taken as if it's a reality. You end up with faith. And that's the silliness of the Greek wisdoms. And anyways, so we're information farming, the anthropomorphic principle. As you start to get into all these various weird realities, and like which they in the multiverse, they grow extremely strange about what is probable and like and what is infinite often creates impossibility infinitely, repeating itself infinitely. Like any impossible thing that can occur over an infinite timeline does occur, infinitely repeating itself. So like this reality I just explained does exist most likely in some portion of the infinitely cubed repeating multiverse. And you'll discover that like all these various models can coexist, and they do exist if they're possible. Are they probable? No, but it's an infinite model. So how do we as a species from inside of our creation, which is a finite cube, kind of update the software, patch it, and make it an infinite creation rather than simply having a single cube repeating itself infinitely? It's pretty simple. And this is reality programming, and it's something that it's a reality program that actually affects physical reality simply by us using our logic to break it. And so this also has applications in matrix simulations, which I'll get into later. So essentially, we are in a finite cube that is infinitely repeating in the multiverse. There's a finite amount of time in the universe, finite amount of variables, and so even if every variable took every possible combination and every possible it's still finite. So how do we break this? By using logic and a simple device. If you create a infinite number generator that is truly infinite, and then you turn it on and you attach it to something that can affect variables, you will create an infinite multiverse splitting. And so what does this mean? It means that if you were to take an infinite number generator and you were to click it, like if you were to click like the Google I'm feeling lucky button, where it's a random number generator that attaches to a piece of information, if you make that random number generator infinite, every time someone clicks it, it cracks the universe, and it essentially plurals from that single point into an infinite amount of possible combinations. And so from inside of our reality narrative, or inside our reality cube of the multiverse, we can instantly crack it and become an infinite multiverse. And now there's other types of multiverses which are nearing infinite, which is a result of so I think I may have lost my train of thought earlier. I'm going to recap. The nearing infinite multiverse had a big bang, and then from inside of this universe more singularities occurred, and so it's like they're branching off from our original universe, and they're growing exponentially over time till this universe dies. So it's an exponential growth curve from one universe creating two universes, which creates four universes, which creates 8, or whatever the exponential growth rate is. But then there's also the universal decay. So like you have the first curve going exponential and it's nearing infinite, but it never hits even a fraction of infinite, because a fraction of infinite is still infinite. And so you have a growing exponential nearing infinite curve, and then you have a secondary curve which begins occurring behind it, which is the decay, which is decreasing the amount of universes based upon the average decay rate or heat death rate of a universe. And so the secondary curve is accelerating at exactly the same rate, just delayed by the age of the universe, limiting the number of universes being created, but it's always growing larger until it hits I think it might hit a stable point as the Planck unit is reached, but anyways, it's a finite amount of universes that's nearing infinite until it hits the stable universe point, and it's more like a mega universe than a multiverse. It's all attached to each other. The multiverse, with our finite amount of universe time and the finite amount of variables is repeating itself in cubes until we begin mating them. Then they start genetically diploid mating. You can track every single universe with a single serial code. You can store it in data servers and stuff until you create a reality patch that creates an infinite pluraling, creating combination of variables that are infinitely pluraling into every direction because it's an infinite random number generator attached to a variable manipulator, which is the human being. And so we have successfully just now turned the multiverse infinite version of it from a finite cube block to an infinite multiverse with a simple reality patch. And so let me see my notes really quick. What else is there to know? Let me see what I wrote. Okay, so that's kinetic reality. That's like the size of the universe, the scope of how large it is, the mega universe or the multiverse, which is nearing infinite, the original matrix, the original multiverse infinite model, which is cubed, diploid mating, can be mapped to the patch, which has made it truly infinite. What comes later now in our understanding? Well, our civilization has seen in 10,000 years stone tools to space age, and we're 30 years away from matrix simulations that are, you plug into it like the Matrix in the movie. You're in a simulated reality that can suppress parts of your brain so you don't even know you're in a simulation. And this technology will continue to grow in sophistication. It will become diffused within the population so everybody can get access to it. And then it will start to become miniaturized to where it's on, like on Game Boy, then a smaller phone, then it's a device planted into your brain that you can play at the DMV. That literally, because of time well dilation and the computational rates combined with the augmentation of our neurons with bionics in the liquid mirror, it will make it so like you could in reality be in the year 3000, 4000 in a DMV waiting to get your spaceship license, and you're playing a 30-year game time dilation as a simulation. And like what this means is that, and then as it advances, you begin to be able to create matrix simulations within matrix simulations. It's like those people who create those really primitive computers in Minecraft using the Minecraft tools, except like infinitely more complex, essentially in depth. What does this mean though? So if our civilization on this single planet can have billions of simulations running in our minds, and because we have the augmentation that allows us to do this combined with the technology, you essentially have the total population of Earth running in simulations. And then as Earth expands, like every planet can have its own, like every star system can have a Dyson sphere around it running simulations. The 2 trillion galaxies populated with colonization 13 billion years from now will have the technology for simulations that like there will be hundreds of trillions upon hundreds of it's the number of planets in our universe is roughly 8 with 23 zeros after it. If you combine that with Dyson sphering of stars that are running simulations combined with like the planets running simulations, you end up with a number so astronomical that like even if this is the only universe, the likelihood that we're in a simulation which has time dilation combined with the age of the universe, the number of people in the simulations, it's almost impossible that even if this is the only universe that we're not already in a simulation. But then when you start to include the mega multiverse, which is the interconnected decaying multiverse, it becomes even more astronomical to like a factoring of near infinite. And like you combine that with the infinite multiverse, which was just cubed, combined with the cracked multiverse, which is now infinite, the likelihood we're in a matrix simulation is almost infeasible that we aren't. So what does this mean? Well, it would mean that God type beings could exist, but it would be a Gnostic God, like some demiurge that's keeping you in a simulation, whether you chose to enter it or not. And it also means that like our logic can begin to program reality. Once we get the base code of how the simulation works, you can crash it from inside of it. Would you want to do that and get the attention of the Gnostic God? Probably not. But like, this is the scope of of the creation we live in. It's astronomical, beyond astronomical. You start to get weird things like occurring, infinitely repeating because of the infinite size of it. There's various mechanisms to understand the difference between a mega multiverse and an infinite multiverse. That both the cubed version, there's infinitely repeating mating with sliding diploid mating algorithms, genetic mating algorithms, or the cracked infinite multiverse that has an infinite amount of pluraling slides with every variable combination. Like, I'll get into those in the next class. Yeah, so I guess live like you're not in a simulation, but definitely ponder it and the implications. And like, I hope this class was enjoyable. I'll see you in the next class.